We've had relative beginners come out here for our Learn to Train seminars and break their personal records by 50 to 100 pounds. That's not because they got stronger, and it's not because of the environment. It's the
Get the fuck up. Simon says, get the fuck up. Throw your hands in the sky.
What would you recommend to a 15-year-old kid who just started lifting, but is interested in taking it to the next level and getting into powerlifting?
A 15-year-old kid that just lifted doesn't really tell me a whole lot, because I don't know what the sporting background is or any type of athletic background. So I got to have a couple answers on this one. I have to go with one, assuming that he's really done nothing except lift weights for the past year, and another direction that he has some type of sporting background. And either entry into the answer isn't going to matter after 6 months or so, because the conditioning will be there. So if it's a 15-year-old that's interested in powerlifting, I think that's great. You know, I started competing when I was 13. So what I advise, if there's no sporting background and all they've been doing is just being a gym rat, is to spend a couple months working on their aerobic capacity, or what some would call GPP, other people will call work capacity. And that's not walking on a treadmill, that's things like sled drags and higher rep technique work for the three main lifts, the squat, bench, and deadlift, and not being so concerned on how much weight you're lifting. If it's a 95 or the bar or 135, whatever it is, just make sure all the repetitions are solid. So you want to build that technical base, and you want to build that conditioning base. So a lot of the weight training that you would do after the technique work would be, I would advise to be more done in some type of circuit style. I don't want you to hog the whole fucking gym, because it really doesn't matter what you're doing. You can go from machines to free weights, just hit 10 exercises, maybe a minute rest between exercise, and go one circuit through, then the next week add another circuit through, the next week add 3 circuits through, and then start to increase the weight. And then after 4 to 6 weeks, you should be conditioned enough to start focusing more on training specifically for powerlifting. If you have the sporting background, you already should have the conditioning to not have to go through all of that. And what I just explained is a very, very basic, condensed view of conditioning, because I don't have a lot of information on the person. There's some people that will take a year or more, just to get to a conditioning phase to be ready to train. So I'm making a big assumption here that that's not the case, so I can spend more time focusing on the other. Now, if you want to start training for powerlifting, I'm biased as far as programming goes to a West Side method, or as people call it, conjugate method. To me, it's West Side. It's always been West Side. It's a form of conjugate training, but credit goes where credit's due. And the reason I like that for beginners is a couple reasons. It's going to teach them how to strain, which they don't know how to do. A lot of beginners don't know how, when the weight gets heavy, they just stop, because they don't get how, if you keep pushing hard enough, even if it feels like it's going to stop, it will keep moving. So with that in mind, the exercises need to be safe. You're not going to do this with good mornings. You're going to do it with, safety bar squats, regular box squats, maybe a closer stance squat, a wider stance squat, pin pulls, deadlift, some variant of the main lifts for your max effort day. And then for your dynamic day or speed day, just pick a weight that you can maintain really good solid technique with, and use that for week 1, and do 12 to 15 sets of 2 on the squat, and 12 to 15 sets of 2 on the bench, take about a minute rest between sets, and push with as much force as you possibly can. Each week, you can add a little bit more weight as long as the force that you're pushing with and the bar speed stays relatively the same. What this is gonna do when you're having 12 to 15 sets is, in powerlifting, there's only one repetition that matters, and that's the first one. So a lot of people, when they're doing sets of 8, 10, 12, say they do 2 sets of 12, they get the opportunity to do 2 first reps. Compared to if you're using the dynamic effort method and you're doing 15 sets of 2, now you got 15 opportunities to do a first rep. So from a technique standpoint, there's no better way to work your technique, because what happens when you're doing higher rep sets and you're trying to do technical work is your brain's gonna shut down. You're gonna check out, you're gonna become bored. The other thing is you're gonna become fatigued. So the technique breaks down. So if you're doing a set of 10 and the first 2 are really solid, but the last 8, you're mentally not there and you're starting to be fatigued, you just reinforced bad technique with 80% of that set. So when you leave the gym that day, you actually didn't become better. You reinforced 80% of bad work. So that's not what you want to do if you're getting into the sport, or if you're in the sport in any capacity whatsoever. Once those bases are covered, then don't get too wrapped up into what exercises to do after that, or what we would call special exercises. Just do what's fun. Just do what you want to do for now, because you're still young and you're still starting out. So limit it to a total of 5 to 6 exercises for the whole training session. Make sure there's 1 for abs, make sure there's 1 for lower back. The rest of the stuff, just do whatever you want, because at this phase of training, you're going to get stronger based upon your technique far before you're going to get stronger based upon physical strength. I'm going to repeat that again. When people get into a sport or get into powerlifting to begin with, technique is vital. Technique's what's going to make you way stronger right out of the gate. So the argument on the other side of the debate is, when weights get heavy, technique's going to look like shit. So just keep lifting like shit. And I understand that, and I know exactly where they're coming from, and to a certain point I agree with that. But if the emphasis is not on technique, you can strain and have those reps that kind of break down and look like shit for a whole year and put 20, 30 pounds on each lift as a beginner. Or you could get really solid technique and not even really have to get stronger and put 100 pounds on each lift. We've had seminars where we've had relative beginners come out here for our Learn to Train seminars and break their personal records by 50 to 100 pounds. That's not because they got stronger, and it's not because of the environment. It's the technical corrections. So that's where the focus needs to be for a beginner. I can't overstate that, or understate, overstate, whatever the fuck it's supposed to be.
Okay, kind of contrasting with that, we've got a lifter that's getting back into the game after a 13-year layoff. He's 49 years old, and this is a power lifter. So how would this process be different than the process that we looked at for the younger individual?
I need to know how fucked up he is. When he says getting back into the game after 13 years, that can mean a lot of different things. It could mean that all these questions are really hard to answer, because it could mean that he competed for 13 years, beat the shit out of himself, and then took 13 years off. Or it could mean he did a few meets and then took 13 years off. Coming back into the sport, even at 49, if he's coming back into the sport in the 13 years, it's been somewhat healthy for his joints. He hasn't been pounding the shit out of his joints, and it falls back to training age. So you can take a guy that's 49 years old, and I would reduce the 13 years off of the 49 and then figure out what his actual training age is, because it's wear and tear in the joints that beats people up. There are age factors as well, but for lifters, it's generally the wear and tear on the joints. So for somebody that's 49 years old, I don't buy into this. You have to change your training so much when you're, 40. I think that's kind of a fucking joke, because a lot of the world records that I've seen were done by people that are in their 40s and mid 40s. It just depends on how healthy you are when you get there, and I would actually argue and say maximum strength potential in powerlifting probably happens between 35 and say 42 from what I've seen. So the goal that I have working with anybody, if they're really passionate about the sport and they're in it for the long haul, is how do I get them to that age as healthy as I possibly can. So at 49, I wouldn't change the advice I gave for the beginner. You still have to build the aerobic base, because that's what's going to determine how you recover and what your capacity to train is going to be. So that has to be done. That's not jogging. It's like I said, it's not the treadmill stuff. It's not jogging. It's, sled dragging, prowler work, interval type training, circuit training, anything like that to build the aerobic base, so you have a base to be able to recover from the training. And then ease into it. You're not going to start at 49 doing the same shit you were doing 13 years ago. So it may be just going in and working on squat technique and maybe doing one work set and shutting it down for the day. And then next week you do a little more. The next week you do a little more. So you have to look at it as far as where do you want to be a year from now, and plan backwards from that. So at 49, if he wants to get back into it, I would say let's look at a meet that's going to be at least 12, 16 months out. And then the goal of that meet is just to finish the meet. Not to hit the records that you hit before. Numbers are irrelative. Let's get to the meet healthy. Let's get to the meet where you can strain with weights, so you can actually test, where you are in your training, and then program backwards on, we need at least 12 to 16 weeks to be able to peak down to the meet. And then after you remove that, you're looking at 8 months. What needs to be done in the 8 months before you get to that? That leaves at least 3 months of just GPP, general conditioning work, to be able to hit what you need to do. So I think he knows the answer to his own question just by looking at it from a long haul and breaking it into phases. When I first came to Westside, something that was different for me with Louis that I did not have when I was training myself or was working with other people, is he looked at everybody that came into the gym in regards to quadrennials or 4 years. So when I came in, he's looking at me as, this is where you're going to be in 4 years, and then clicking back from that, where I was used to looking at it saying, oh, this is what I want to do this next meet, and then structured all my training with that next meet in mind, with the mindset of, fuck it, if I die after that meet, I don't give a fuck. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get to that meet, and didn't think with that longer term approach to where he did, which is the correct way to do it. So that's how I look at it. But a beginner, I think you need to break it into 1 year before you start looking into 4.